I remember the sound before I remember the pain. A sharp crack, almost like a tree branch snapping in the cold. For a split second, my brain could not place it, and then the breath was gone from my chest, and I was on my knees in the grass. It was not the first time my brother Mark had lashed out at me, but it was the first time the blow landed in a way that changed something inside my body. My ribs felt like they were folding inward, and every attempt to breathe sent a stabbing fire through my side. I remember clutching at the ground, fingers digging into the dirt like it could anchor me to the world while everything spun. Mark was above me, still shouting, his face red with fury, the words lost in the ringing that filled my ears. I saw neighbors across the street freeze in their driveways, their expressions a mix of shock and hesitation, the kind of look people have when they know something terrible has happened but are unsure if stepping in will make it worse. When I finally collapsed forward onto the lawn, I heard someone scream my name, not Mark, but Mrs. Miller, the woman who lived next door. She dropped the grocery bag she was holding, cans rolling across the sidewalk, and rushed toward me. The rest blurred together. The flashing red lights, paramedics leaning over me, the stiff collar around my neck, the hiss of oxygen as they placed a mask over my face. I wanted to say it was not as bad as it looked, but the truth was I could not speak. Each attempt made black spots dance at the edges of my vision. The pain was searing and deep, the kind that makes you understand instantly that nothing will be the same afterward. In the ambulance, someone asked for my emergency contacts. I whispered the names of my parents, Linda and Richard. The paramedic nodded and tapped it into the screen. There was relief in that moment. Relief that soon they would arrive, soon I would see them rushing in, worried, maybe even apologizing for not protecting me from Mark sooner. For a few minutes, I let myself believe that. When I woke in the hospital, the first thing I saw was a bright white ceiling and the sound of monitors beeping steadily. A doctor stood at the foot of my bed, explaining that 2 of my ribs were fractured, one dangerously close to piercing my lung. I nodded, trying to stay composed, trying not to cry in front of strangers. Then the nurse said they had called my parents. My chest loosened a little. They would be here any moment, I thought. Any moment the door would open and my mother would rush in, tears in her eyes, and my father would demand to know how Mark could have done this. Any moment. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. The machines ticked on. No one arrived. I reached for my phone on the table, the screen lighting up with notifications. Dozens of new posts on social media, and at the top of the feed was a photo that stopped me cold. My parents standing on a beach, the turquoise water of the Maldives behind them, both smiling wide with sunburnt cheeks, drinks in hand. The caption read, "Finally, peace." I read it again and again, my fingers trembling. My ribs throbbed with every shallow breath, but the ache in my chest was something worse. They had been called by the doctors. They had been told their daughter was in the hospital with broken bones after a violent assault, and their response was to smile for a camera half a world away. The realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. I was alone. The doctor returned later that night and asked if I had any other family to contact. I thought about Mark. I thought about the last image of him standing above me while I gasped for air. I shook my head. "No," I said, voice thin and cracked. "Just me." The truth is that moment was more painful than the fractures. The moment I realized that in the eyes of the people who should have loved me most, I was not worth boarding a plane or even making a phone call. I was worth less than a vacation photo. That was the beginning of the end, the point where something inside me shifted from desperate hope to quiet finality. It was the day my ribs broke, but it was also the day the illusion of family broke with them. Long before that afternoon when my ribs cracked under my brother's fists, the signs had been written into the fabric of my childhood. My family had always been built around a hierarchy that no one questioned. At the top was my father Richard, who believed his word was law. Beneath him was my mother Linda, who enforced his rules with a smile that never reached her eyes. Then came Mark, my older brother, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. At the very bottom sat me Emily, the daughter who was expected to hold everything together but never ask for anything in return. Growing up, I learned that silence was safer than speaking and that obedience was valued more than dreams. I remember being 10 years old, coming home with a perfect score on a science test. I rushed into the kitchen waving the paper like it was a trophy. My mother barely glanced at it before asking if I had remembered to fold my brother's laundry. Richard looked up from his newspaper only to remind me that Mark's soccer game was more important than silly tests. Later that night, when Mark's team lost, he threw his cleats across the living room, narrowly missing me. My father clapped him on the shoulder and said boys need to let out their frustration. That was the first time I realized that anger was his privilege, not mine. By the time I was in high school, the pattern had hardened. I worked part-time at the library while keeping up my grades, but the money I earned rarely stayed in my pocket. My father insisted that since I lived under his roof, my earnings belonged to the family. Most of it disappeared into utility bills or Mark's ever-growing expenses. When Mark crashed his car, I was the one who handed over my savings to help with the repairs. Linda smiled sweetly as she called me responsible, then turned around and told relatives that Mark had worked hard to cover the costs. He did not work a single shift. He just strutted around with a new set of wheels while I walked to school in worn-out shoes. In college, things did not change. I commuted to save money while Mark lived on campus in style expenses covered by loans that somehow ended up with my name attached. I remember signing paperwork I barely understood because my father told me family sticks together. Those loans followed me long after Mark dropped out, leaving me scrambling to make payments while he lounged at home, spending afternoons at the gym and nights with his friends. Each time I questioned it, my father's voice was sharp. "Do you want your brother to end up homeless?" he would say, as if my refusal to sacrifice myself would condemn him to the streets. I learned not to argue because arguing only led to slammed doors and cold silences that stretched for weeks. My mother's contribution was quieter but no less cruel. She had a way of pretending my needs were invisible. If I was sick, she brushed it off as drama. If I asked for help, she said I was ungrateful. The most painful moments were the subtle ones, the times she leaned close to whisper comparisons. "Mark is strong. Mark is dependable. You should be more like him." It was not just neglect, it was erasure, a constant reminder that I was always falling short of an impossible standard. By the time I entered my 20s, I had accepted that my role in the family was to provide. Every paycheck I earned went through my father first. He decided what portion I was allowed to keep. Some months it was barely enough for groceries. I told myself it was temporary, that once I built my career, things would shift. But the truth is, they never intended to let me go. My success was their safety net. Whenever Linda's credit card bill swelled, I was the one who quietly covered the balance. Whenever Mark wanted to try a new venture, I was the one who signed the paperwork. The worst part was that no one thanked me. Gratitude was a foreign language in that house. The only recognition I ever received was criticism when I dared to hesitate. I remember one Christmas when I bought modest gifts for everyone with the tiny sliver of money I had saved. Mark laughed at the scarf I picked for him and said it looked cheap. My mother frowned and told me I should not have wasted money when there were bills due. My father reminded me that presents do not matter as much as loyalty. That word loyalty became a chain around my neck. It was invoked whenever they wanted something from me, whenever I dared to question the fairness of it all. And so I carried the burden year after year, my spine bending under the weight of obligations I never agreed to. On the outside, we looked like a picture-perfect family. Holiday photos were staged with bright smiles, my parents boasting about their perfect son and their dutiful daughter. People who saw us thought we had it all together. They did not see the nights I cried quietly in my room after wiring money to cover yet another of Mark's mistakes. They did not see the way my mother's eyes hardened when I asked for even the smallest kindness. They did not hear the way my father dismissed my achievements like they were inconveniences. That was my life before the day of the broken ribs, a lifetime of sacrifice, of being the background character in a story that was never about me. I had trained myself to endure, to push through exhaustion, to believe that if I just gave a little more, maybe one day they would see me, but that day never came. Instead, it built toward a single, violent moment when the years of imbalance finally crashed down on me in the form of my brother's fists. That was not just an accident of anger. It was the inevitable conclusion of a family that had always seen me as expendable. That day did not just break my bones. It cracked open the truth I had been too afraid to admit. In my family's eyes, I was not a daughter or a sister. I was a resource, a tool, a convenient scapegoat. And once tools are broken, they are discarded. The day it happened began like any other ordinary argument, the kind that started small and spiraled because in our house every disagreement was an opportunity for Mark to assert dominance. He had been pacing the living room complaining about money again. His gym membership was overdue, his car insurance needed paying, and he was furious that our father had told him to figure it out himself, which of course meant turning to me. "Emily, you have a stable job," he said, as if that erased the fact that nearly every paycheck I earned was already swallowed by bills that were not mine. I told him no. For the first time in months, I said the word clearly, firmly, without the soft excuses I usually used to cushion his ego. His eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, the air in the room shifting with the sudden heat of his temper. "Do not play stubborn with me, Emily. You know how this works." That was his line, the reminder that I was expected to carry him to bend to surrender. But I stayed still. Something inside me refused to back down this time. I said I will not pay. Not this time. That was all it took. His face twisted with rage, his fist clenched, and before I could step back, the blow landed square in my chest. The sound of breaking was loud and alien, followed by a pain so sharp it stole the breath from my lungs. I stumbled backward, clutching my side, and when I collapsed to my knees on the front lawn, the grass felt cold and damp against my skin. I tried to inhale, but the air would not come. Every movement felt like knives grinding inside me. Mark's shouting faded into background noise, muffled by the ringing in my ears. I saw his shape, towering over me, his mouth moving, but I could not make out the words. Then I saw neighbors frozen at the edge of their yards, their faces pale, their hands halfway lifted as if debating whether to intervene. It was Mrs. Miller who broke the paralysis. She ran toward me, her groceries scattering, and yelled for her husband to call 911. "Oh, my vision flickered. Blue sky, white clouds, her panicked face. Then the wail of sirens in the distance. The paramedics worked quickly, sliding me onto a stretcher, strapping me down, securing my neck. The world swayed above me as they loaded me into the ambulance. I heard one of them say possible rib fractures, potential lung puncture, stabilize now. The words blurred, but the urgency in his tone cut through my haze. In the ambulance, they asked for emergency contacts. I whispered Linda and Richard, my parents. The names felt heavy on my tongue, but there was relief in giving them. I told myself they would come. Surely this time they would come. The ride was a blur of flashing lights and clipped commands. By the time we reached the hospital, darkness was pressing in at the edges of my sight. The next clear memory is waking in a room of bright lights. My chest wrapped tightly, monitors beeping a steady rhythm. A doctor stood near the bed, explaining the injuries. 2 fractured ribs, 1 dangerously close to puncturing my lung. I nodded weakly, trying to hold on to his words through the fog of medication. Then the nurse mentioned that my parents had been called. Relief spread through me. They would walk through the door at any moment, faces etched with worry, apologies spilling out. That hope carried me through the first hour. Then 2, then 3. Each time the door opened, I lifted my head only to see a nurse, a technician, a tray of supplies. No Linda, no Richard. When the silence grew unbearable, I reached for my phone. The notifications flooded the screen, but not one from my parents. At the top was a new photo posted on social media. My mother and father stood arm in arm on a pristine beach, the turquoise water of the Maldives glittering behind them. My father raised a glass, his smile broad. The caption read, "Finally peace." I stared until the screen dimmed. The pain in my chest was nothing compared to the weight of those 2 words. Finally peace. As if my suffering was the drama they had escaped from. As if their peace required my absence. I tried to breathe, but it came out jagged, choked by more than broken bones. I scrolled again, looking for a message, a missed call, anything that suggested they had at least acknowledged what had happened. There was nothing. Just likes and comments from their friends admiring the sunset, the ocean, their happiness. Not a single word about me lying in a hospital bed. That was the moment the fracture inside me deepened beyond the ribs. I understood in a way I had always resisted that I was not their priority. I never had been. The doctors checked on me, adjusting the drip, murmuring comfort, but their kindness only emphasized the absence of the people who should have been there. That night, as the machines kept me tethered to rhythm and life, I realized I was not just broken in body. I was discarded, erased, the inconvenient daughter left behind, while the golden son carried no consequence. Mark was not arrested. He was not even questioned yet. My parents had made sure their trip was uninterrupted. And me, I was the wreckage left to pick up alone. The truth settled heavy. The day my ribs broke was not just an accident of violence. It was the culmination of years of being silenced, dismissed, and erased. And in that hospital bed, staring at a photo of my parents laughing on a tropical shore, I knew the collapse was not just physical. It was the breaking point of a lifetime of denial. Lying in that hospital bed, the weight of betrayal pressed down heavier than the bandages wrapped around my ribs. The physical pain was sharp, but it was the silence from my family that hollowed me out. I kept replaying every moment in my head, searching for any reason why they had not come. Maybe their phones had been off. Maybe the hospital had dialed the wrong number. Maybe they were boarding a flight home at that very moment. But each time I opened my phone, the truth stared back at me, fresh photos of cocktails on the beach, captions about serenity and escape. They were not coming. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not ever. That realization was not a sudden explosion of grief, but a slow drowning. Every memory of their indifference rose to the surface, connecting together into a pattern I could no longer ignore. I remembered being 12, running a high fever and shivering under a blanket on the couch. Linda stood over me and said, "Stop pretending Mark has an important game tonight. Do not make it about you." She left me there and drove off to cheer from the sidelines, her voice louder for him than it had ever been for me. I remembered being 16, earning a scholarship that could have been my ticket out. When I told them, Richard's only response was, "Did you thank your teacher?" as if my achievement was a courtesy owed to someone else, not a victory of my own. I remembered working double shifts at the diner to help with bills, only to find out later that my paycheck had gone to cover one of Mark's speeding tickets. Each time I asked why the answer was the same, because family helps family. But family had never helped me. They had drained me, used me, discarded me when I hesitated. And now, lying hooked to machines with fractured bones, I saw the truth. I was never their daughter in the way children should be cherished. I was a placeholder, a resource, a safety net stretched thin until it snapped. The disappointment was absolute, not just because they had failed me in this moment, but because it proved that every desperate hope I had clung to was an illusion. I used to imagine that if I gave enough, worked enough, proved myself enough, they would finally turn and see me. But the Maldives photo was the answer. They saw me only as weight to be carried when it suited them and ignored when it did not. That night, a nurse asked if I wanted to try calling them again. My throat tightened as I shook my head. I knew what the voicemail would say. A cheerful automated message about being unavailable, followed by more pictures of beaches, more evidence of their freedom purchased at the cost of my pain. The nurse placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, her eyes kind, but the kindness of strangers only deepened the ache. Why could strangers care when my own blood could not? Hours stretched into days. My body began the slow process of healing, but my heart hardened. I stopped expecting them to walk through the door. I stopped staring at my phone for messages that would never come. Instead, I scrolled through memories, each one like a shard of glass cutting into the last illusions I had left. The Christmas when I wrapped small gifts bought with my babysitting money, and Mark laughed at the scarf, calling it cheap. The birthday when no one remembered until late evening, when Mark teased me for expecting cake. The graduation where I stood with my diploma in hand while Linda fussed over Mark's girlfriend's dress. Each moment replayed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital, the truth undeniable. They had been disappointing me all my life, only now the disappointment was final. It was not a matter of bad timing or misunderstandings. It was who they were. They were people who valued Mark's tantrums over my tears, who valued their vacations over my survival. And the cruelest part was that they had trained me to accept it, to keep waiting, to keep hoping. The disappointment now was not just in them, but in myself for believing for so long that things could change. I thought of the phrase my father used whenever I resisted: "Do not make a scene." It echoed in my head as I lay still in that bed, my ribs aching with every shallow breath. Do not make a scene. That had been my instruction for life. Stay quiet. Endure. Sacrifice. And for years I had obeyed. But as the monitors beeped and the nurses adjusted the drip, a different thought crept in. Maybe the scene needed to be made. Maybe silence had never been survival, only surrender. That realization was faint at first, just a flicker in the darkness, but it grew stronger with every hour of their absence, every social media post proving their priorities. My disappointment became a boundary, the quiet line where hope ended and something else began. I could not name it yet, but I knew I would never return to being the daughter who begged for scraps of affection. The fractures would heal, but the bond had shattered beyond repair. On the 4th day of my hospital stay, when the silence from my parents had become so loud it felt like a constant ringing in my ears, the door finally opened and in walked the one person I had not expected but should have. My grandfather, Henry. My mother's father stepped in with his worn windbreaker zipped halfway, his silver hair combed neatly back and his steady eyes fixed right on me as if he had known exactly what he would find. For a moment, I almost cried because he did not ask what happened. He did not demand an explanation or minimize my injuries. He simply walked to the chair beside my bed, lowered himself with a soft grunt, and placed his weathered hand over mine. "I heard you were hurt, Emily," he said, his voice quiet but firm, and in those 4 words there was more concern than I had heard from my parents in my entire life. I tried to explain through the fog of medication, stumbling over the details of Mark's rage, the fracture, the ambulance, the absence of Linda and Richard. He listened without interrupting, his brow furrowed not in surprise but in the weary recognition of a man who had seen this pattern before. When I finished, he exhaled heavily and said, "So they finally broke you too." The way he said it made me realize he had always known where this family was headed. He told me that years ago, when Linda was young, she had already shown the same traits she now inflicted on me. She had been self-absorbed, quick to demand, quick to blame blind to anyone else's needs. He admitted he had failed to correct it then, and now he was watching the cycle repeat through her and through Mark. But unlike my parents, he did not make excuses. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "None of this is your fault." That simple statement hit me harder than the blow that cracked my ribs. No one had ever said it to me before. For the first time, I believed it might be true. Henry stayed with me through the afternoon. He spoke with the nurses, asked real questions about my recovery. Even quietly settled a bill for one of the tests my insurance had denied. He did not make a show of it. He just slipped the papers back into his pocket as if it were nothing. Then he pulled a notebook from his bag and said, "We need to take a look at your finances." I hesitated, embarrassed, but he insisted. As he flipped through the documents I had saved in scattered folders, his expression darkened. He pointed out loan agreements with my signature next to Mark's 3 credit cards with my name, but balances that had nothing to do with me, 2 utility accounts I did not even use, and the monthly auto transfer from my account straight into my mother's. It was all there in black and white, the evidence of years of quiet exploitation. Every time they had a problem, I had been the solution. Every time they ran short, I filled the gap. I had thought of it as family duty, but laid out on paper, it looked more like a theft disguised as tradition. Henry tapped the page and said, "This ends now." His certainty startled me. I had lived so long under the assumption that there was no escape, that the web of obligations was permanent. But he explained that I had legal rights, that I could cancel the transfers, that I could challenge the CEO-signed loans, that I could draw boundaries they could not cross. He told me that loyalty is only as strong as the people you are loyal to, and that I had given mine to people who never deserved it. As he spoke, something in me shifted. It was not the fiery anger I sometimes imagined having. It was a quiet steel, the kind that does not shout but holds firm. I realized I was not powerless. I realized that for once I had someone willing to stand beside me and remind me that I mattered. That night as he left, Henry squeezed my hand and said, "Rest now, tomorrow we start fresh." His presence lingered even after he walked out the door like a lamp left burning against the darkness. For the first time since the assault, I felt a strange sense of safety. The broken ribs still ached with every breath, but the deeper wound, the sense of being utterly alone, had begun to mend. Henry's arrival did not erase the years of neglect, but it gave me the first taste of what family was supposed to feel like. And once I had felt it, I knew I could never go back to being the girl who accepted silence and called it love. The next morning, when the nurse brought in my breakfast, Henry was already sitting at the edge of my bed with a folder of documents and a pen in his hand. He greeted me with a nod and said we have work to do. At first, I was confused, still groggy from the medication, but as he spread the papers out, I saw the strategy forming. He had spoken to an old lawyer friend the night before someone he trusted, and now he was walking me through the first steps of cutting the chains my parents had wrapped around me for years. The first task was simple but symbolic. I opened my banking app, navigated to the auto transfer that funneled a chunk of every paycheck into my mother's account, and canceled it. My hands shook as I hit confirm. It felt like stepping off a ledge into the unknown, but Henry placed a steady hand on my arm and said, "There, that is the sound of freedom beginning." Next, he had me call my employer's HR department. With Henry coaching me, I explained that all future direct deposits should be redirected to a new account, one the lawyer had helped me set up under my name alone. Within minutes, the single biggest tether they had to my income was gone. For the first time in years, I felt like my earnings were mine. After that, we moved on to the loans. Henry had compiled the details, cross-referencing the agreements with what the lawyer had found. 2 of them had been taken out with my name, forged signatures that barely resembled mine, but had passed because my parents had vouched for them. The lawyer was already preparing fraud reports, and I signed the necessary statements. The thought of the fallout made my stomach knot, but Henry reminded me that protecting myself was not betrayal. Betrayal had already been committed against me. One by one, we dismantled the web. The utility accounts I never used were closed. The car insurance policy tied to Mark's vehicle was canceled. Passwords to online portals were changed. Each action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The more I did, the more I realized how deep the manipulation had run. For years, I had been taught to believe that helping them was my duty. But as Henry guided me through the process, I saw that it had been exploitation wearing the mask of loyalty. When we paused for a break, I looked at him and whispered, "What if they find out?" He gave me a look that was both stern and kind. "Emily," he said, "they will find out. They will rage, they will threaten, they will twist the story, but that is the point. You cannot build peace on silence anymore." His words struck me. For so long, I had avoided confrontation because it seemed safer. But what had safety ever given me except broken bones and emptiness? That afternoon, Henry left briefly to meet with the lawyer, and I lay in the bed scrolling through my phone. Already the messages were coming in. Missed calls from Richard, texts from Linda, short clipped sentences demanding explanations. Why is the payment missing? Did you close the account? Answer me now. Not a single word asking how I was, not a single acknowledgement of the assault that put me in the hospital. Only panic about the money drying up. I turned the phone face down and let the vibrations buzz uselessly against the table. That evening, Henry returned with more paperwork. This time it was about legal protection. The lawyer had filed a no-contact order against Mark, citing the hospital records and witness statements from the Millers. If he tried to approach me, the police would have grounds to intervene. Knowing that barrier was in place eased something tight in my chest. Then came the hardest step. Henry suggested drafting a letter to my parents. Not a plea, not an explanation, but a formal notice. With his guidance, I wrote that effective immediately, I was withdrawing all financial support, revoking permission for my name to be used on any accounts, and severing my role in any debts or obligations. The lawyer would send copies by certified mail. When I finished typing, my fingers hovered over the keyboard, doubt flooding me. This would ignite a firestorm. But Henry's hand on my shoulder reminded me I was no longer fighting alone. He said, "Sometimes peace is not quiet. Sometimes peace is the storm that clears the rot away." That night, I pressed send. In the days that followed, the storm came. My phone lit up with messages escalating from confusion to rage. Linda accused me of being manipulated. Richard demanded I fix what I had broken. Mark left voicemails dripping with venom, calling me ungrateful, selfish, a traitor. But beneath the anger was fear. Fear that their control was slipping. Fear that I was no longer the easy target. For the first time, I felt the power shift. Each angry message was proof that they were scrambling, not me. Each threat confirmed that the counterattack was working. Henry stayed close steady as bedrock, reminding me to breathe through the chaos. He told me the louder they became, the closer I was to freedom. And he was right. With every canceled payment, every legal notice, every line I drew, I felt the grip of their control weakening. I was no longer the silent daughter kneeling under the weight of their demands. I was Emily fractured ribs healing slowly, but spirit straightening for the first time. What I did next was not fueled by vengeance, though I would not have been blamed if it was. It was fueled by clarity. They had stolen enough years from me. It was time to take back what remained. It did not take long for my family to realize the money was gone and the walls were closing in. The first sign came 2 days after I sent the notice. My phone buzzed with a new post from my mother on Facebook, a long paragraph dripping with self-pity. She wrote that her daughter was going through something dark, that I had become unstable, that the family was trying their best to support me, but I was lashing out. She ended it with a plea for prayers and forgiveness. At first, I just stared at the screen, my ribs aching from the laughter that bubbled up despite the pain. She had ignored me in the hospital, sipped cocktails on the sand while I lay broken, and now she wanted the world to believe she was the devoted mother of a troubled child. The audacity was almost breathtaking. Then Mark added fuel. He posted a shaky video filmed in his room, his eyes red like he had been crying. He spoke about how he never meant to hurt me, how siblings fight, how he feared I was spiraling out of control. He ended with a line that made my stomach churn. "I just want my sister back." The comments poured in quickly. Some friends of the family offered sympathy, others shared prayers, and a few even suggested I must be under bad influence. For a moment, I worried people would believe them. But then the Millers stepped in. Without fanfare, they uploaded footage from their security camera, the one that overlooked the street. The video showed the entire assault in brutal clarity. Mark storming out of the house, me standing on the lawn, refusing to back down, his fist slamming into my chest, my body crumpling to the ground while neighbors gasped. There was no mistaking it, no editing, no ambiguity. The truth was laid bare for anyone to see. Within hours, the narrative flipped. The same commenters who had typed prayers for my family turned their fury on them. How could you lie about your daughter when she was the victim? How could you sip drinks in paradise while she fought for her life? The video went viral beyond our town, spreading to local news outlets, then to national feeds. Headlines appeared. Daughter hospitalized after assault while parents vacation in Maldives. Golden Boy brother accused of violent attack. Family faces backlash after smear attempt. My father's company could not ignore it. His clients saw the stories his colleagues whispered behind his back. Within a week, he was placed on leave pending investigation into his conduct, and soon after, quietly let go. He had spent years building his reputation as a man of integrity, and it crumbled in days because integrity cannot survive the weight of truth. Mark faced more than whispers. The police launched a formal investigation, citing the hospital records and the video evidence. He was questioned, suspended from his university, and barred from leaving town. The golden child image cracked, and behind it was only a spoiled man with clenched fists and no accountability. Linda tried to salvage dignity by posting another message, this time with softer words. She claimed she had just found out about the seriousness of my injuries, that she was devastated, that she wanted healing for the whole family. But screenshots surfaced of her earlier posts from the Maldives, smiling beside turquoise waters while I lay in the ICU. People compared the dates, the captions, the contradictions. Whatever sympathy she hoped for turned into ridicule. Even distant relatives began distancing themselves, commenting that they had suspected something was wrong in our household for years. The storm grew, and for once, I was not the one drowning. I was standing on solid ground while the people who had silenced me scrambled to keep their heads above water. But the most powerful moment came when Henry arranged a meeting with the lawyer and suggested we make a statement, not on social media, but in person standing in truth. I hesitated, unsure if I had the strength, but he reminded me that silence had always been their weapon. The only way to take it back was to speak. So, a week later, still bandaged and moving carefully, I appeared at a local press conference. The lawyer read a statement on my behalf describing the assault, the abandonment, the financial exploitation, and the smear attempts. I stood beside him, pale but steady, nodding at every word. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and the narrative became impossible to twist. From that point forward, the story belonged to me, not to them. The fallout was swift. Mark was charged with felony assault. Richard's name was stripped from company directories. Linda's social media accounts vanished under the flood of anger. They tried one more desperate move, filing a petition in court to claim I was unstable, that my actions showed emotional volatility. But the judge had the hospital reports, the witness statements, the financial evidence Henry and the lawyer had gathered. The petition was dismissed within minutes. It was not just a legal loss, it was a public humiliation. Their last weapon had been exposed as another lie. Watching them unravel was not the triumph I had once dreamed of. It was quieter, heavier. There was no satisfaction in seeing your family fall, only a bittersweet release. I realized then that revenge was not about gloating or punishment. It was about truth standing where lies had once reigned. And the truth was enough. As the weeks passed, the ripples continued. My father struggled to find work, his reputation tainted. My mother withdrew from the social circles she once dominated. Mark lived under the shadow of his case, his friends scattering his future uncertain. And me, for the first time, I breathed without the weight of their demands. Each shallow breath still hurt from the fractures, but inside I felt lighter than I ever had. Henry stayed by my side through it all, reminding me that strength is not about never breaking, but about deciding how to heal. His presence kept me grounded when the noise of the outside world threatened to overwhelm me. I thought about all the years I had been told to keep quiet, to endure, to sacrifice. And now, the entire world had heard my story because the very people who tried to silence me pushed too far. Their attempt to destroy me had destroyed themselves. That was the twist they never saw coming. The more they clawed for control, the more they revealed their corruption. The more they pretended to be victims, the clearer it became that they had always been the villains. By the time the trial date for Mark was set, I no longer felt fear. I felt certainty. Certainty that no matter the outcome, the truth had been carved into the record. Certainty that their names were tied not to my silence, but to their own actions. And certainty that I would never again be their scapegoat. I was not angry anymore. I was awake. And there is no going back from awakening. When the trial finally approached, I was prepared for every tactic they might try. My ribs had mostly healed by then, though. The ache lingered as a reminder of what had been taken from me. Henry drove me to the courthouse, his steady presence a shield against the swarm of reporters outside. Mark avoided my eyes as we passed. His arrogance deflated his shoulders, hunched beneath the weight of consequence. Linda and Richard sat stiffly on the benches, their faces pale from weeks of public scorn. The proceedings were straightforward. The video footage was irrefutable, the medical records undeniable, and the testimony from the Millers damning. Mark's lawyer tried to frame the assault as a misunderstanding between siblings, but the evidence spoke louder than words. In the end, the judge handed down a sentence that included probation, mandatory counseling, and community service. It was not the prison term some expected, but it was a permanent stain on the golden image he once flaunted. More importantly, it was a record proof that what he did to me was real and acknowledged. My parents left the courthouse without speaking to me, their eyes downcast, their empire of control reduced to rubble. In the days that followed, I received one final message from Linda. It was a simple text, 5 words long. "Please come home, Emily." I stared at it for a long time, feeling nothing but a distant echo of the girl who once would have wept for such an invitation. That girl had died on the lawn the day my ribs broke. The woman who remained did not crave their home, their approval, or their apologies. I deleted the message without replying. Life after them was quieter, but the quiet felt like freedom. I moved into Henry's small house on the edge of town, surrounded by bookshelves and the smell of his morning coffee. I started therapy not to fix what was broken, but to understand how to live without chains. I wrote about my experience not for revenge, but for clarity, and to my surprise, others reached out with their own stories of survival. I began to see that my pain could be more than scars. It could be a lantern. Every so often, I heard rumors about my parents. Richard drifting from one failed job interview to another, Linda keeping her head down, Mark trying to rebuild his image but finding doors closed. Each time I heard their names, I felt no anger, only distance. They were part of a life I no longer lived, a life I had left behind with the same finality as hitting cancel on those auto transfers. One evening, sitting on Henry's porch as the sun set over the trees, he asked me if I regretted any of it. I thought about the hospital bed, the Maldives photos, the viral video, the courtroom. Then I shook my head. I was not angry anymore, I said softly. I was just done. And being done, truly done, was the most powerful peace I had ever known.